adultery. Anyway, so we've come to the seventh and final stage in the sevenfold puja, and you could call it the culmination or climax of the spiritual mood that's been building since we started. So we began with worship, and then salutation, going for refuge, confession of faults, rejoicing in merits. And then last week we had entreaty and supplication. So finally, transference of merits and self-surrender. And I know many of you are going to be really familiar with the transference of merits and self-surrender, because we generally do this at the end of our Sangha meetings and at other times as well. But don't worry if you haven't attended all of this series of talks and you're not familiar with the puja, because if there's time towards the end, I might give a little recap of the whole puja. And if not, of course, the recordings are there in the WhatsApp chat and you can always catch up on them. Well, on the subject of recaps, I was listening fairly recently to a series of talks called The Awakening of the Bodhisattva Ideal by Sangharakshita, the founder of Triratna. And they were recorded at a Buddhist center, and I'm afraid I can't remember where now, but every one of them began with Madam Chairman and friends. Well, that was his customary opening. And then he went on to give quite a thorough reprise of the previous talks in the series. And at first, I found myself just a weeny bit put out, I have to say. This is me, my bad temper, having to cover all the material again before getting on to the new part. Until one day I had a little kind of aha moment when I realized that this was pure genius for at least two reasons. And one of the reasons is this is how the teaching of the Buddha was traditionally passed down through the generations, through oral transmission, of course. And, it was hundreds of years before anything was written down. And so in passing on the teaching in this way, it mirrored what the Buddha and his lineage taught. And then secondly, the second reason, of course, was it was a perfect way to communicate things more firmly, by and commit to memory by repetition. And that is how they had to do it, because they didn't have any other way. They just had to hear things over and over again until they had it perfectly and could repeat it. If you don't have writing, then that's what you have to do. But I know it really helps me to remember when I hear something over and again. So I just thought, well, if I'm repeating something that has been said in previous talks, then I hope that that's going to be helpful. Now, unfortunately, or you might think fortunately, depending on how this goes, I don't have as long as Sangharakshita had on those nights, but he often discoursed for an hour and a half. So you won't be getting a long replay of the previous themes. But I'm just going to add here that this is the first time I've done a Dharma talk in over 20 years. So it may not be as polished as you'd like or as I'd like. So, but who better to quote from on how I feel about this than Santideva himself, the author of the original text that the puja is taken from. And he starts his treatise, the Bodhicharyavatara, by saying, "Nothing new will be said here, nor have I any skill in composition. Therefore, I do not imagine that I can benefit others. I have done this to perfume my own mind." And the thing is, I've heard those lines many, many times, and some of you here will be really familiar with them. But personally, I never tire of hearing them, because I think that the notion of perfuming one's own mind by giving a talk or a discourse is such a lovely one. And in itself, it's enough to commend anyone to have a go at doing this. Over the years, I've heard many people say that they don't think they can give a talk, but it's actually really worth the effort, because you learn such a lot in the process of doing it, and you really clarify your own understandings when you have to externalize and objectify them. So well, the text from which the sevenfold puja is taken is something written in the very dim and distant past in a land far from here. It all began a very long time ago, probably in the 7th century with Santideva, who we've heard about. And, you know, he was an Indian Buddhist monk and a scholar at the renowned monastic Buddhist University of Nalanda, where he was derided for his apparent laziness. Legend has it that he was mocked by the other monks who thought him rather beyond the pale in his habits. And, you know, they nicknamed him Busu Ku, which apparently means eats, sleeps, defecates, because that's all they ever noticed him doing. Whereas in reality, when they, you know, when they were asleep and they didn't see what he was doing, he was up all night. He was being taught the Dharma by none other than the Bodhisattva Maitrisuri, the gentle-voiced one, who you could think of perhaps as a manifestation of the Buddha. You know, he is a high Bodhisattva or enlightened being. So Santideva then goes on to give a discourse. He's a bit set up, you know, to fail. They think he's going to make a complete hash of it, but he gives this talk at a great meeting of the university, and it was something fresh that had never been heard before, and it was called the Bodhicharya Avatara, or a guide to the Bodhisattva's way of life. Maybe nowadays we'd call it How to Be a Bodhisattva, or even Bodhisattva 101, or something ghastly, you know, like Enlightenment for Dummies, something like that. But anyway, he's reported to have ascended into the air where his voice could be heard from beyond the clouds. And then he completely disappeared and was never seen again. So anyway, you don't have to take that myth, you know, absolutely literally. I once heard myth described as that which never was, but always is. You know, I quite like that as a working definition, you know, because you can't pin a good myth down. The whole point of it is to fox the conceptual rational mind and, you know, engage parts of us that are beyond the rational, which may be super rational. So back to the sevenfold puja. In the introduction to the puja, in the puja book, I've got one here. Comes in different colors, but I think that's a fairly up-to-date one. Yeah, in the introduction that we use in Triratna, Dharmadina, who's one of our really very much loved and respected senior Dharmacharinis, women order members, she says this, of this part of the ritual, the transference of merit, and I'm going to quote her. We express our aspiration to be of service to all beings everywhere in their search for enlightenment and freedom from suffering. We touch on and are perhaps rewarded with an emotional glimpse of the altruistic and other regarding attitude, which is the essential nature of the Bodhisattva. So I'm just now going to read the transference of merit as it appears in the puja, and then I'll unpack it a bit. And well, you know, you might like to just kind of close your eyes for a moment and be comfy, and we'll just take a few seconds to settle, and then just, you know, really open your ears and open your hearts, and I'll read this you know, lovely verse, this really beautiful verse from the puja. So just take a moment. May the merit gained in my acting thus go to the alleviation of the suffering of all beings. My personality throughout my existences, my possessions, and my merit in all three ways, I give up without regard to myself, for the benefit of all beings. Just as the earth and other elements are serviceable in many ways to the infinite number of beings inhabiting limitless space, so may I become that which maintains all beings, situated throughout space, so long as all have not attained to peace. So I'm going to go through it line by line. May the merit gained in my acting thus go to the alleviation of the suffering of all beings. And so we have to kind of ask ourselves, well, what is the merit gained? And the discourse of Santideva covered a whole set of teachings on the path of how to become a bodhisattva or awakened being. The sevenfold puja, as Vima Chitta pointed out very adroitly, I think, in her an earlier talk, it's an abbreviated bodhisattva's journey. So the idea is that by having trodden the path of the bodhisattva, which of course has taken, a lot of time and energy and determination, by doing that, we'll have accumulated some merit as a result of all that skillful action. And if you think about it, living a spiritual life, a dharma, a life informed by the dharma, is really swimming against the stream in many ways. We try and cultivate kindness and to refrain from harming other beings in a world that is rife, where people are harming not only other forms of life, but other humans, their own so-called loved ones, and even worse than themselves. So it's actually kind of normalized. You read about it in the news every day, and we're trying to do the opposite. We're trying to live with kindness. We're also attempting to be generous to all, to practice our open-handed generosity. When it's normal to look after your own, maybe your own friends and family, but this is like way beyond that. This is to all beings. And in a world that's constantly stimulated, we're stimulated to seek pleasure in the form of food that we don't need, and more and more possessions. I look in my wardrobe and with horror sometimes at how much stuff is in there. We're stimulated into codependent relationships that are based on transactions rather than unconditional love. Whereas in the spiritual life, in the Dharma life, we're trying to cultivate stillness, simplicity, and contentment. We're trying to speak and communicate in ways that are both truthful and kind and helpful, rather than tell lies or to bend the truth. And we attempt not to join in with gossip, and we want to refrain from carping and being dismal. And we attempt to keep our minds clear and radiant through mindfulness and being aware. So it's not just about leaving off the booze and the recreational drugs. It's far more far-reaching. We need meditation to cultivate the ability to have this level of awareness and to keep our minds operating in a way that's more flexible and open and compassionate. So if all this has got a familiar ring, it's because these are the training principles for practicing Buddhists, where we move in the direction of skillful thought and action, and we attempt to refrain from what's not helpful. So yes, that effort to swim upstream, as it were, does generate something that we can call merit. And moreover, just to mix the traditions up a bit, in his Song of Meditation, Hakuin, who was a Japanese master, he lived in the 1700s, so a long time after Santideva, he said of the merit gained from meditation, I quote, "By the merit of one single sitting, he destroys innumerable accumulated sins. How should there be wrong paths for him? The Pure Land paradise is not far. When in reverence, this truth is heard even once. He who practices it and gladly embraces it has merit without end." So that's the merit gained from practicing ethics, meditation, and developing wisdom. And in the puja, we avow that we want this accumulated merit to go to the alleviation of the suffering of all beings. And, that's all sentient beings. It's not just our nearest and dearest, our family and our friends, our mates. It's not just the people whose values and politics we agree with or who we think share our values. No, it's not just them, and not even just all human beings, but all sentient life, all animals, birds, fish, everything living that walks or creeps or crawls on the face of the earth, or swims in its waters or flies in the air. And maybe sentience doesn't even end with the animal realm. maybe it extends beyond that, and perhaps it extends beyond this planet to other planets and solar systems and galaxies, you know, beyond anything we can imagine. So it's really big, you know, and here we find echoes of the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara's wish to save all sentient beings from suffering. And as you may realize, and, you know, in the myth, Avalokiteshvara certainly realizes, you know, this is a massive and monumental ambition of the highest order. And as if that's not enough, as if aspiring to alleviate the suffering of all beings isn't at all enough order, you know, we declare that we are willing to give away everything that we have, that we are, that we have ever had, and that we will ever have to achieve this aim. Wow, you know. So he, you know, it goes, my personality throughout my existences, my possessions and my merit in all three ways, I give up without regard to myself for the benefit of all beings. So we imaginatively give it all away. And yeah, well, just going back over some of those lines, you know, my personality throughout my existences, well, in the Buddhist tradition, you know, there would have been and still is, in many Eastern cultures, you know, a really strong belief in rebirth. So, you know, my personality through my existences may well refer to this. But, you know, in the West, the idea of rebirth can seem alien and challenging to some of us. But maybe some of us do have a sense of it as well. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what happens after we die, and whether we're reborn again. But I do know that in one lifetime, I have had many, many small deaths and rebirths. So that, you know, the whole of the spiritual life is a process of letting go, or dying, you know, in a sense, and then rising again from the ashes to a newer understanding and greater insights. So that is perhaps one way to approach this idea of my personality throughout my existences. And then there's my possessions. Ooh, well, this is a tricky one, isn't it? My possessions. What do I think of as mine, my possessions? My house, you know, its contents, including my mobile phone, my computer, my tablet. This is starting to sound a bit like an inventory for house contents insurance, isn't it? But, you know, what else do we possess, or do we regard as ours? You know, our possessions, our partners, are they ours? Our children, our pets, car, our rights and freedoms, you know, do we possess freedom of speech and so on? So whatever it is that makes us us, that reinforces our own identity and hence makes us separate. So that's our possessions, you know, and it says, and are all of these in all three ways. So this prefix in all three ways, well, that can mean past, present, and future. But another view I've come across is it could be the three ways of body, speech, and mind. So the ways, you know, so my merit, you know, and my personality and my possessions can mean these things, either, you know, across time, lifetimes even, and or our merit and so on can be developed through actions of body, speech, and mind. Well, the verse goes on to talk about how the earth and other elements, and the other elements in the Buddhist tradition would be seen as earth, water, fire, air, space, ether. These are serviceable in many ways to the infinite number of beings. And, you know, there's an awful lot that could be said about the elements and how they support us and what they are even, but I don't really think there's time here. So all I'm going to do is, well, I'm just going to pick one thing. I'm going to draw a parallel between the earth element and, you know, and our planet Earth in the way that it sustains and feeds all life without distinction, you know, and this is the spirit of what we're talking about here. So, you know, all life everywhere, regardless of how big or small, you know, from the mightiest whale to the tiniest amoeba, you know, from the giant redwood trees to microscopic algae, and however grand or apparently insignificant, all of this life is maintained by the earth without any kind of discrimination. So this is the attitude we're encouraged to take towards all beings. You know, that we're willing to give away our own merit to sustain these beings without any prejudice whatsoever. So the aspiring bodhisattva, i.e. us, we are saying that we wish to be like the earth and other elements that are serviceable in many ways to the infinite number of beings inhabiting limitless space. And not only that, but we say that we wish to support all beings throughout space for as long as it takes, i.e. until we have all reached the place of peace, the freedom of the awakened. Well, I don't know about you, but I find that pretty cosmic and very beautiful. And it's big, you know, it's very, very big. And at times, you know, I can feel a little voice protesting in the back of my head sometimes that goes a bit like, oh, for goodness sake, you know, get real. You know, how can anyone do that? It's hard enough looking after myself, never mind countless millions of beings. Well, you know, I think the point is that maybe we don't take it absolutely literally, you know, with the rational mind, or like our heads might explode, just like Avalokiteshvara. So I think the secret perhaps is to allow it to inspire us and then to do what we can. And, you know, I think a little health warning here is that we need to take care of our own minds in order to be able to give to others. And so our meditation and our Dharma practice, you know, must first of all really nourish us. And you can't give water from a well that's dry, as the saying goes. And if we feel overwhelmed, it may be that our well is in danger of being depleted. So we need to take care so that we have something to give. And, you know, if I'm feeling a bit glum or a bit down and it all feels a bit much, I sometimes bring to mind this very short poem by Emily Dickinson, which I really love, which goes like this. If I can stop one heart from breaking, I shall not live in vain. If I can ease one life the aching, or cool one pain, or help one fainting robin unto his nest again, I shall not live in vain. And I like it because, you know, from when I was a small child, I was always trying to rescue little creatures. And I can, you know, clearly remember when I was not much more of a toddler, finding a baby bird that had fallen from its nest. And I carefully picked it up and put it in a shoebox to show my mum and tried to look after it. And well, of course, you know, baby birds, it didn't have a happy ending. But, you know, I did my 4-year-old best. And there's this other lovely quote from Emily Dickinson, you know, along similar lines. And she says, they might not need me, but they might. I'll let my head be just in sight. A smile as small as mine might be precisely their necessity. So that's the transference of merit. And just to refresh our memories on why we do all of this devotional practice in the first place, you know, I turn back to Ritual and Devotion in Buddhism by Sangharakshita, where he says that higher thought, intuition, and spiritual vision can only act through the higher emotions. And the ordinary positive emotions, therefore, have to be refined and sublimated. And he goes on to say that there's 3 ways of doing this. And the first one is through faith and devotion. And that's what we're doing in the puja. That's what we're cultivating in ceremonial work. The second one is the fine arts like poetry and music. He particularly thought this would be classical music and painting. And the third way is through a combination of both. And for myself, I would add contemplation of the beauty of nature to that list. And, you know, I'm sure you've probably got your own ideas and ways to contact and to refine your emotions too. But the thing is that if we don't have higher refined emotions as equivalents to our intellect, then we're going to be in danger of being taken over by cynicism and scientific materialism and general resistance, which may manifest as feelings of boredom even, perhaps. So personally, I need a big vision, a big ideal to make it worth getting out of bed in the morning. But pragmatically, I know this is all way too big for me. So, but, you know, in the tension that exists between the dream and the vision and the current reality, you know, there can arise something else which is bigger than all of it. And, you know, it can take us by surprise sometimes. In fact, Sangharakshita goes as far as to say that when you have a really strong puja where people join in wholeheartedly with faith and energy, that it is possible to have a sense of the arising of bodhicitta or the will to enlightenment, generated by the collective consciousness that we create that's bigger than our individual consciousnesses. That's fantastic, isn't it? I love that. So it's not necessarily easy for us to take on devotional practices, especially if we have strong conditioning that goes against it. Bhante Sangharakshita, he describes in some of his autobiographical material a time when he was living in Kalimpong in northern India. And, you know, he had lots of visitors at different times and there over the years, he was there for many years. And he tells of one Englishman who came to stay with him in his hermitage. And this guy was really interested in Buddhism. And, you know, he loved to discourse and debate at length and discuss with Sangharakshita about Buddhist philosophy and Dharma teachings and, you know, the history of Buddhism and so on. And, you know, he was quite intellectual. And I think he might have done some meditation as well. However, when he was invited to join in with the pujas, you know, he was really resistant and he just wouldn't go. And this went on for quite a long time, you know, many weeks, I believe. And then one day he ran into Sangharakshita's study, very excitedly saying, "I've done it, Bhante, I've done it." And when Sangharakshita inquired what it was that he'd done, he said, "I bowed." And asked what that was like, he declared he felt quite different. So there is something about that act of acknowledgement, you know, of surrender to what is highest and best in us and in the universe, you know, which is in the spirit of ritual and devotion, you know, whether it's a simple bow or a full-blown puja with chanting and candles and incense and flowers and so on. And well, at this point in the talk, I really have to add that when I first encountered the sevenfold puja, you know, it was a couple of years into learning meditation and going to talks at my local Buddhist center. So when I first encountered the puja, I was on a week-long retreat at Taraloka, which is the Triratna Women's Retreat Center. And it really didn't go well. Yeah, I hadn't had any preparation for the puja, and I didn't really know what it was all about. And when I heard it, you know, I managed to overlay all my Roman Catholic childhood conditioning onto it. And I just saw it through that filter. And having rejected religion in my teens and, you know, being quite atheistic, and then having trained as a scientist, well, I was absolutely furious, to be honest. To my mind, the Heart Sutra just became the creed, etc. And, you know, I felt utterly let down and betrayed by the idea, you know, this is all my projection, of course, the idea of chanting things that I didn't understand and apparently being expected to swallow up, you know, a whole load of mumbo jumbo down whole. Anyway, fortunately, somebody offered to hold some study sessions on the retreat to help those of us who are new to the puja and to understand it a bit more, you know, just as we've been doing, really aiming to do in this series of talks. So, you know, we can have really strong reactions either way to puja and devotional practice. So anyway, my brief recap is that by the time we reach the transference of merit and self-surrender, this final stage of the puja, we'll already have worshipped, you know, in the first stage, whether literally or imaginatively, offering gorgeous flowers and lamps encrusted with jewels and, you know, sprinkled exotic rare perfume on the ground before the Buddha, or the ideal of enlightenment and liberation. And so we will then, in the second stage, have saluted the Buddha with folded hands, and the Dharma, you know, his teaching of the way to freedom from suffering, and we'll have saluted the Sangha, or the spiritual community. Whether this could be the historical lineage of teachers, or and that spiritual community, or enlightened beings, or maybe it's our friends and teachers in our Sangha, all of those of us who are striving to be free. And just to say, you know, when we bow in front of the shrine, you know, we're not bowing down to a bit of plaster or metal or wood. You know, they're very poor however beautifully made they are, they're very poor representations of a massively lofty and beautiful ideal, you know, that's possible for us all to attain. We bow down to our own potential and our capacity to transcend our limitations, and to honor those who have managed to do this, you know, the community of those who've led the way. So in the next stage, in going for refuge, we're saying that we've placed, you know, or we're at least aspiring to place the ideal of enlightenment at the center of our lives. You know, we're effectively committing to reorient our lives, you know, from that everyday pull and push of wants and desires, of avoidances and aversion. We're reorienting from that into a mandala where the Buddha is at the center, and everything is arranged around this awakening. And as a result of this desire for wisdom and compassion, you know, we've become determined to act in ways that honor and support kindness, generosity, contentment, truth, and awareness. So the fourth stage, the confession of faults, is then intended to help us to really honestly acknowledge what gets in the way of living up to these ideals that we aspire to, and to strengthen our resolve to live ever more deeply from a place of love and truth and wisdom. And then we rejoice in the merit which this brings, you know, because there is merit. I mean, there's no doubt that skillful action brings skillful consequences. And then last week, Vimlachita talked about entreaty and supplication, where we effectively ask for a teaching and open ourselves to the change that inevitably comes about when we're receptive to stepping into the unknown and learning something new. And we also visited the mysterious Heart Sutra, which I'm not going to attempt to describe here, just to say that it is deeply profound and very beautiful. And finally, we are vowed to give up any accumulated merit for the sake of all beings. That's the transference of merit and self-surrender. And finally, at the very end, we close the puja with chanting mantras to the enlightened energies of the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas, ending in Om Shanti, 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 or peace, peace, peace. So that's it. And thank you. So what we're going to do now is, well, the first thing is, I think if we unmute, are you going to do that, Vimlachita? You